believe everybody is making their way back there. I apologize for not having a PowerPoint. I'm not sure what's going on with the technology, the way it is, but it's not wanting to work, so I'll try to work on that throughout the week. Hopefully we'll be able to have that back up and running, Lord willing, next Sunday. We continue on here with our study of church history. So a lot of this stuff is in the bulletin. If you have that, and you want to run back and grab one of those, again, I apologize for not being handier than what it is, but we'll get through it best we can. All right. This will work. All right, great. All right, here we go. So we went through last week and we were able to discuss the idea, and again, what we're trying to do through this series of lessons is talking about the history of the church and how we got from Jerusalem to where we're at today and the effects and everything going on with the church. So we talked about that a little bit last week and set the stage for the area in Rome and the area in Jerusalem and what it was like and what kind of rule it was under and how that affected so many individuals, and when we see that throughout the Bible in the New Testament. So this morning, what we're going to continue on, and we'll get it buttoned up here in this class today, or we should, is we're going to look at some different individuals, some historians that were not Christians. So that's important, because we stop and think about that, and you think, well, I hear all this stuff about the church, and I hear all this stuff from Church of Christ preachers, scholars in that way, but maybe that doesn't appeal to you, and you think, I want to hear something different. I want to hear something maybe from some other individual. So what we're going to look at this morning are 4 individuals that were historians in that time. Now, what's significant about each of these men is that they were not Christians, and in fact, one of them hated Christians. They hated them, they despised them, and we're going to talk about some of this stuff. So what we can determine from this is, one, some things about Jesus and how we have historical accuracy of Jesus, and others being about the church and the historical evidence surrounding the church and what the church practiced and what the church did. So this morning when we begin here, let's look at Josephus. Now, some of us, if you have been around anybody that has tried to teach class and things like that, maybe they have spoke about Josephus. This individual was a Jew that went over to the Romans in that time. And from that, let me get here. All right, so he was a Jew, and at that time there was a great Jewish revolt. So we talked about that a little bit last week. The idea that Rome is in there, Rome is in power, they're taxing you, they've got a mass amount of soldiers around, and there was a great revolt among the Jews. And we talked about some of those individuals called zealots because of their zeal for the Jewish nature. And they said, we're not going to listen to any of this stuff. So there's about 4 main battles that are taking place. We spoke about one last Sunday with the battle or the siege of Masada. We showed that clip where that ruins were up on that mountain, and we saw the Roman bulwark working up to get them and to eradicate all of the Jews in that area. Now from that, another siege, and this was the siege of Yodaphat. Now that's important, because Josephus was a commander in the Jewish army there, or the Jewish militia, and he is in there, and the Romans have captured and they've surrounded this place, they've besieged it, and these Jews thought, well, it'd be better to just die than it would be to surrender to the Romans. So they begin to draw straws, and through this, through the series of events, they would execute their brother. And they would say, all right, I'm not going to kill myself, I'm going to draw a straw, and then I kill this man, and then this other man draws a straw, and he kills this man, and it goes forth down the line, and that sounds horrible, and it is, but Josephus was the 2 men left, right? It's him and another man, and they're going to draw the straws, and I don't think he wants to kill that individual, and he doesn't want that individual to kill him, so he says, hey, listen, why don't we just surrender? It can't be that bad. So he begins to show favoritism toward the Roman government, right? The Roman soldiers. Now, unfortunately, some people look at Josephus as a traitor. The Jews did not like Josephus at all. They thought he sold out. But in fact, Josephus did a lot of good for the Jews because he was a historian. He had the accounts of things going on, and he helped different individuals through that and kind of shined a good light on the Jews in some way. But he showed favoritism toward Vespasian and Titus, those individuals that would soon destroy Jerusalem. So he adopts this name Flavius from the Flavian Empire. So sometimes you'll hear him Flavian Josephus. So this is the individual. Now what's important about this individual is that he quotes about Jesus. He quotes about these things. Now again, this man has no ties to the church. He has no ties to the Church of Christ. He has no ties to anybody but the Jews. He is a Jew, and he's being an interpreter and being a historian and a record keeper for the Romans. Listen to what Josephus has to say regarding Jesus. Now again, he's not a member of the Church of Christ. He's not anything like this. This man, he was born around 37 to 38 AD. So a long time ago, right at the beginning, he's seeing a lot of this stuff. He says, at this time, there was a wise man who was called Jesus. And his conduct was good, and he was known to be virtuous. And many people from among the Jews and other nations became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die. And those who had become his disciples did not abandon his discipleship. So, we hear Josephus talking about Jesus Christ. And again, a historical figure that had no ties to the church. He has no agenda of saying, well, this is the Christ. He will admit, when he's talking about John, he will admit that Jesus is the Christ, but a lot of people try to dismiss that quite a bit. All right, so he's saying this in referring to John the Baptist. Josephus would say, but some of the Jews were of opinion that God had suffered Herod's whole army to be destroyed and as just punishment on him for the death of John the Baptist. So he references again John the Baptist. These events happen. So it's like, all right, what's the credibility of all this? Right? That these historians saw these events taking place. They saw these individuals. They knew of men like Jesus and John the Baptist. So that to us as the historian, right, you say, all right, well, what about the church? What about the Bible? The credibility of all this, this helps bring a lot of that into play. And we say, all right, we understand that these things were happening. They were happening around that time. So Josephus, what a great guy. Like I said, his books, I think there's some copies of that in the library if you want to flip through those sometimes. But it's a good, it talks about the destruction of Jerusalem. So when you go into like Matthew chapter 24 and it talks about all these things coming, Josephus makes mention of all these things as well. And a really good, it's just a really great study when you go through him and the light that he shines on the Christians and Jesus in the first century. So again, and he had no ties to the church, and this is what we're trying to get at. All right, so the next guy we want to talk about is Tacitus. Tacitus. So we talked about Josephus, and again, I apologize for not having any of this up on the screen. But Tacitus, he wrote about around the year 100 AD, and this man strongly disliked Christians. So when you hear him talk about Christians, then, if a man says, I hate them, I despise them, when we think about that maybe today in the political realm, someone talking highly, right, of a different party, we think, this is kind of like this man hated them, right? He even comments on the fact that Nero burns down Rome and he blames the Christians in it. So this is Tacitus writing these things. Now, when he continues writing, he talks about in the way in which Christians would die. And this is just horrible to read when he's talking about this. He talks about that some of them were covered with skins of animals and torn by wild beasts. So when we get into some of these early persecutions, we'll get into this, we get into Fox's Book of Martyrs, that they would put sheepskins and things like that and turn them loose and turn wild dogs out on them, worrying them down, right, causing them to be killed by that, right, being ripped up by the animals. Again, Jesus, we look at the crucifixion, and we look at the fact that Jesus was crucified, but he is not the only individual to ever be crucified. He is not the only one that the Romans used to crucify people a long time before that. Jesus just happened to be executed in that way, and the Christians were even executed by crucifixion. In fact, when you look at the destruction of Jerusalem, we showed that some slides back, that when you read Josephus, that he says that the Jews were trying to exit the city. They were trying to escape, and so many that were caught by the Romans, and they crucified so many of them that they ran out of trees around the area to hang them up on. That's how many people were crucified trying to come out of Jerusalem, and they would do it right by the wall, because what they wanted you to do, the Roman government, they say, all right, look, see, this is what's going to happen to you. You can't get out of here. We've got you bottled up. If you try to escape, we're going to crucify you. So there was a tactic that the Romans were doing. And friends, they just starved those poor Jews out in Jerusalem, and then finally went in and attacked and killed them all. Now, so he talks about them being crucified. So again, I know we make a lot of comment toward Christ being crucified, and it's important to do that, but please understand that that wasn't anything special for him in that regard, that the Romans were doing their crucifixion long before that. Now also, that they would have combustible material dabbed on them, right? Having this fuel, if you will, dabbed on them and set on fire. So we hear about that when Tacitus is writing about Nero. Many of us may be familiar with that, with the idea that he would light up his garden by the Christians, right? He would stand them up, and they would put like wax jackets on these individuals, places, things like that, and they would light them up and burn them. And he said he would light his garden through that area. What a wicked man Nero was, and we'll get into maybe some of that later on. But when he's talking about these records, what does that mean to me? Again, what does this mean to church history? It means that it's evident that the Christians were there, right? That they were prevalent, and that they were doing these things, and that the Christians were persecuted. That when we hear these things talked about in the New Testament, that persecutions are going to come, and when we talk about in Revelation 2:10 that they have to remain faithful unto death, right? That's what John is teaching or talking to the 7 churches in Asia. The persecution's coming, Rome's coming. They're going to be doing these things to you, right? They're going to be crucifying you. They're going to be having wild beasts come at you. They're going to be burning you. They're going to be turning you in the Colosseum and letting loose animals like that. He says the persecution is coming. So we think about that today, and we apply that to ourselves today. Again, that even any type of persecution that we have, but this is what these individuals are having to face. And again, go back, and we're going to get into Pliny here in just a minute. But when you read 1st and 2nd Peter, when Peter's talking about that the persecution is coming, that it's coming, this is the persecution that Peter is talking about. So, Tacitus, he hates Christians, he hates the church, he thinks he cares nothing about for them, but we find this individual showing what the Bible says to be historically accurate. All right, so that's a good source to go to. Now, when we go to Suetonius, this individual, he's going to live, or he's going to be born around 88 AD. So again, very much towards the front of the first century. So again, what does this mean to us, and what does this mean as far as the Bible's authority? Well, in his book, The Life of Claudius, so that's the things he's going to write. You might know him from the book, The 12 Caesars, or The Life of Nero is what he's going to write about. But he makes a distinction saying that the Christians were expelled from Rome. Now, think, okay, what does that mean to me? So let's go in our Bibles to Acts chapter 18. Quickly here, and we'll look at this. Acts chapter 18. Now, what does it mean if this historian, again, here we are trying to make sure the Bible is credible, that we're trying to make sure that it's not just some man-made things. We say that Claudius, he expelled the Christians from Rome. We go to Acts chapter 18 and verse 2. It says, and found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy, which with his wife Priscilla, because that Claudius had commanded that the Jews depart from Rome and came unto them. So, Paul finds Aquila and Priscilla because they had been expelled from Rome. And Suetonius, he writes about this, saying that at that time, right, Claudius, he said, get the Christians out. He despised the Christians. There was persecution against them, so they were pushed out of Rome. So this proves, right, that the Christians were in Rome during the reign of Claudius. So from that, then you can begin to place things and date things. So here's a good historian looking at that. All right, here's Pliny the Younger. This is the one we'll spend probably the rest of our time, the majority of our time, upon him. All right, so if you still have your Bibles out, let's go over to 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 1. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 1. We'll look at that here, looking at it. I got an article about Pliny the Younger. That's a good. All right. So Pliny the Younger, he's born around 61 AD, and he's going to be sent to Bithynia, around 112 AD as the governor. So he's going to be the governor of this area. Think, what does that mean to me? What does that have to do with the church? Let's notice in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 1, if you've already got there, you may have seen it. Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to the strangers scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. So Peter is writing this letter, right, to all these churches that are throughout this area. Now, when you read 1 Peter, listen to what Pliny's doing. This is the leader, right? This is the governor of that province. So he doesn't know how to handle the Christians. He doesn't know. He gets these Christians brought up to him, and he doesn't know how to handle them. So he writes the Emperor Trajan, and he says, I want to know how to handle the Christians. So this is from an article in the Christian Courier. This is August 2023. So if you get the Christian Courier, you might look for this as well. I'm going to read some of this and some of the excerpts from the letters that Pliny is writing, right? He's going to write to the emperor. He said, I'm a governor of this area here in this, and I don't know how to handle these Christians. These Christians are coming up. People are bringing Christians up. How do I handle them? So here's what he says. He says, it is my custom, sire, he's writing to Trajan here, to refer to you in all cases where I am in doubt. For who can better clear up difficulties and inform me? I have never been present at any legal examination of the Christians, and I do not know, therefore, what are the unusual penalties passed unto them, for the limits of these penalties, or how searching and inquiry should be made. I have hesitated a great deal in considering whether any distinction should be drawn according to the ages of the accused, whether the weak should be punished as severe as the more robust, or whether the man who had once been a Christian, note this, gained anything by recanting being a Christian. So what Pliny's writing, he said, there's people bringing up names all the time, and I don't know how to handle them. But then what we want to really look at is the idea of recanting being a Christian. So again, Pliny continues. Again, whether the name of being a Christian or even though otherwise innocent of crime should be punished, or only the crimes that gather around it. In the meantime, this is the plan which I have adopted in the case of those Christians who have been brought before me. So he said, I don't know how to handle these Christians. Here's what I'm doing. Now listen again, and when we think of this, put yourself back when we've read passages like 1 Peter and 2 Peter about how we are to be remain faithful and we have to be ready to give an answer to the things that we believe. Listen to what he says. This is what would happen. Like today, they said, all right, Ben Williams, he's a preacher. I know he is. He's brought before them. This is what happens. He says, I ask them whether they are Christians. If they say yes, then I repeat the question the second time and also a third, warning them of the penalties involved. And if they persist, I order them away to prison. So he says, are you a Christian? He said, oh, yes, sir, I am. He'll continue that. He said, go to prison. That's going to be put away. For I do not doubt that by their admitted crime, what it may, their peculiarity and inflexible obstinacy surely ought to be punished. There were others who showed similar mad folly, whom I reserved to be sent to Rome as they were Roman citizens. So we talked about that last week, that if you're a Roman citizen, you had that appeal. We find Paul appealing to the Caesar, appealing to Caesar because he was a Roman citizen. Later, as is commonly the case, the mere fact of my entertaining the question led to a multiplicity of accusations, and a variety of cases were brought before me. An anonymous pamphlet was ensued containing a number of names of alleged Christians. Those who denied that there were or had been Christians and called upon the gods with the usual formula recited the words after me, and those who were offered incense and wine before your image. So again, we made note of that last Sunday. Caesar worship. They said, you're going to worship Caesar and only Caesar. So Pliny's here. He's telling them, hey, all you have to do is recant, right? All you have to do is say, I'm not a Christian anymore, and you'll be free to go. And he says they do that, right? They curse Christ, and they do these things, and they're offering offers to you, right? Offering incense and wine before your image, Caesar. Now, which I had ordered to be brought forward for this purpose, along with the regular statues of the gods. All such I consider acquainted, especially as they cursed the name of Christ, which is to be said, bona fide Christians cannot be induced to do. So we talked about that in our worship hour this morning, right? Being that the real disciple of Christ and being able to stand up for that, the fact he says, if you're a real Christian, you won't, right? You won't say that. You won't curse Christ, curse the name of Christ. We confess he is Christ. We don't curse it. All right. He continues on and says, still others that were, whose names were supplied by an informer, these first said that they were Christians, then denied it, insisting that they had been, but were so no longer. Some of them having recanted many years ago, and more than one full 20 years back, these all worshipped your image and the God's statues and cursed the name of Christ. But they declared their guilt or error was simply this. Now, we'll stop right there before we get into it. So what we're getting from this is a historical evidence, right? Pliny had no respect for the Christians, right? He's the one punishing the Christians. So we find here in this that the persecution was coming, that if they came, they would have to say that they were a Christian. Again, that's why Peter says, be ready to give an answer. You be ready that when a man asks you if you're a Christian to defend that, not necessarily that we have to answer every Bible question that ever comes into our mind or gets asked from us, but the idea of make sure you tell them why you are a Christian. So we find these individuals, again, we talked about that, the danger of apostasy this morning in the worship hour. Said some of them said, oh, I'm not a Christian anymore. I was a Christian. You've got this old bulletin and it's got my name listed in the directory. I'm not a Christian anymore, so don't do that. I'll worship your gods. I'll bow down. I'll curse Christ. Just let me go. People would do this in order to save their souls, but the real Christians would not do this. Now, this record right here proves what they were doing in the first century as far as the church. He says, but they declared their guilt or error was simply this. On a fixed day, they used to meet before dawn and recite a hymn among themselves to Christ, as though he were a god. So far from binding themselves by oath to commit any crime, they swore to keep from theft, robbery, adultery, breach of faith, and not to deny any trust money deposited with them when called upon to deliver it. This ceremony over, they used to depart and meet again to take food, but it was of no special character and entirely harmless. They also had ceased from this practice after the edict I issued, by which, in order with your orders, I forbid all secret society. So Pliny, he said, you can't meet anymore, you can't do that anymore, and they say, okay, that's fine. So the Christians, law-abiding citizens, we might say, well, we find these individuals being persecuted in that way. So it's amazing, friends. Again, the purpose of this lesson, and again, especially Pliny, is these were historians. These were men that cared nothing about the church. They cared nothing about Christ. They did not confess him. In fact, Josephus, he would not confess him as a Christ. He said that he saw the miracles, but he wouldn't believe them. He was a Pharisee. He was a Jew, and he was a Pharisee. He would not say that Jesus was the Christ. Again, we're reminded of that in the scriptures, that if they confessed that Jesus was the Christ, they'd be put out of the synagogues. So he's a Pharisee, a very well-off individual as far as a Jew. He said, I'm not going to say that Jesus is the Christ. But he said that he was there. He said he existed. There was a man by that name. There was a man, John the Baptist. So when we go through these other passages, it brings about the historical evidence of the church, that the church was there, right? That the apostles, they go out, they're preaching and teaching Jesus, and the church is growing. They're adding to the church. Acts chapter 2, verse 47. They're adding to all this, and from all this, friends, we understand that these things are historically accurate. It's not just from the Bible. It's not because I heard a preacher say at one time. These were men that were not Christians, and they knew that these Christians were going on, and we had the historical evidence of that. So any questions or comments about some of those men? All right. But a good study. And again, you'll find a lot of men looking at Josephus, especially when you get into the prophecies, get into like Daniel and the major and minor prophets, all those guys like that, and the situations that were going on. We look back to him because he had all these very, very, very good records of the Jewish history. Now, that'll be all for, I know we'll get out here a little early. I'll give you that time back. I've probably taken it a time or two before, but we'll squeeze out a little early today. But next week, Lord willing, we'll begin to look at the establishment of the church. I love talking about that. So we'll begin to talk about the establishment of the church and the church through prophecy and situations like that. I love talking about the prophecy of the church. That's a great study, and I hope and encourage you to be here for that, and we'll try to go through that, Lord willing, next Sunday. So any questions or comments there about the historical record of the church before that? All right. Well, thank y'all for being here. Hope you had a good fall break. Everybody excited to get back to going to it, I guess. I think the boys are out again tomorrow, giving them a hard time. So we got to go back. He said, "I'll get one more day, Dad." Okay, that'll be all right. That'll be good. So I hope you've been able to enjoy that. Enjoy this pretty day out there. So thankful for each of you being here. Again, great encouragement to me. So.